Therese, take us away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Bloomberg Opinion live stream on July 5th. We are now in post-election territory. It was a pretty cataclysmic night for the British Conservatives, a historic night for the Labour Party. We, I think, are now, we would all agree, in a very different political landscape in Britain than we were, just 24 hours ago. The polls have been telling us for a long time that we're going to be here, but I think there is still a lot to digest. A landslide by numbers in one sense, in terms of the numbers of seats that the Labour Party got, but some very mixed signals in terms of vote share and some of the way the vote was distributed. So I am joined again by Marcus Ashworth and Adrian Wooldridge, my Bloomberg Opinion colleagues and columnists. We've been talking about the campaign for the last 6 weeks. Now we're going to talk about the results. Marcus, give me your impression of the night. Labour took 65% of the seats with 35% of the vote, something like that?
I'm not even sure it's that. Morgan McSweeney is an electoral masterclass he's given us all. What an amazing campaign the Labour Party have conducted, with precisely almost no policies and no charisma. This was a anything but Conservative election. It was a get the Tories out under any means necessary. It's hugely benefited the Liberal Democrats, who've gone with the same amount of votes. They only got 12%, which is less than 14% than Reform got. And they've gone up from 11 to 71 seats. That's almost 7 times the same amount of votes. At the same time, we've seen the Tories go basically almost half their vote and then lose 2/3 of their seats. And of course, Labour, which has won a victory in seats, no doubt about it, absolutely huge. It's the biggest net gain since 1945, but it hasn't quite matched the total of Tony Blair. But nonetheless, they won 1/3 of our votes, and they've got 2/3 of our electoral seats. Now, I'm not going to complain about the first past the post system. I actually think British democracy has shown itself again to be exemplary in the way that both Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have handed across. I don't think Starmer or indeed Rayner have shown anything other than elegance in accepting that. We're into a different, calmer landscape, but I see one very distinct thing, which is the Europeanization, should we say. 3 clear minor parties have come out of, I'm not saying nowhere, but have got a proper platform. The Greens on 4 seats, including one amazingly in North Herefordshire. The Reform Party have got, they've got 4 million votes and got 4 MPs. So do the math on that. That's unfair on them for the moment, but by the by, they've got a proper platform. And then this pro-Palestine, anti-Labour thing with 4 seats, including Jeremy Corbyn, who got included in that. They're not a proper party, but they may well become one in the future. So we've got a definite different shape to European style like politics in the UK.
Let's put up a chart of the seats if we can, and then just so viewers can have a look at that while we're chatting for a couple of minutes. Adrian, you wrote this morning in a column that this election was much more an anti-conservative election than a pro-Labour one. Kier Starmer appeals more to the head than the heart, where he appeals at all. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this was definitely a vote against the incumbent party. It was a kick the bastards out rather than bring Labour in. So it was an anti-incumbency party election, particularly anti the Conservative Party, because they've been the incumbent party for 14 years. But also you saw the same anti-incumbency logic working out in Scotland, where the SNP did extremely badly. They've been in power in Scotland now for, I think, 17 years. They've been a terrible government, pursuing, in my view, an appalling policy of splitting the country up. But they were really trashed, and they were thrashed by the Labour Party. And although we've seen the Labour Party in terms of its share of votes, static in England, actually going down in Wales, in Scotland you saw a real genuine Labour surge, both in terms of their proportion of the votes and in terms of their number of MPs. Again, anti-incumbency being incredibly important in this. I agree with Marcus in all of the qualifications that he's made, but I would say that a win is a win. The Labour Party has won a very significant victory playing by the rules of the game. And presumably
it's selling at them.
they would have pursued a different set of policies had the rules of the game been different. So they do have not just a lot of seats in Parliament, but they have a real, legitimacy. This was a big Labour Party victory, and there's nothing you can do that diminishes that. The Tory Party has got its worst result, I think, in the history of the Conservative Party, and it faces a real dilemma, which is underlined by the arrival of Reform and Farage, which is where do they go from here? Because there are two clear and attractive routes for them. One is to reunite the right, to use a phrase, try and reunite with Reform, bring Reform plus the Conservative vote together, and that's actually added together is bigger than the Labour share of the vote, or move back to the centre, try and squeeze the Liberal Democrats down, go back for a more traditional one nation conservatism. That is a very, very difficult question to answer, and they will be fighting over that for some time to come. Perhaps for 10 years.
Adrian, I think Gareth Southgate would absolutely agree with you that a win is a win, no matter how ugly. So
I'm the Southgate pundit here. Yeah, I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Let's have a look at Kier Starmer claiming victory.
We did it. You campaigned for it. You fought for it. You voted for it. And now it has arrived. Change begins now. And it feels good, I have to be honest. 4.5 years of work changing the party. This is what it is for. A changed Labour Party, ready to serve our country, ready to restore Britain to the service of working people.
So two things.
I see more excitement in a baked bean factory. I mean, the charisma is not there.
I'd also say that voice is very, very difficult to take. And I remember when Mrs. Thatcher came to power, she had a very irritating, grating voice, which she worked on and changed. And I perhaps it's terrible to say this, but I hope Kier Starmer does something to make himself more attractive to the public when it comes to his vocal range.
Well, vocal range aside, he has a message of change. That was a similar message that we heard from one Boris Johnson in 2019, who claimed that he was ushering in a new kind of Conservative Party. After that election, the predictions, and Marcus, I remember our conversations back then, they were for Boris Johnson staying in 10 Downing Street or 11 Downing Street. I think he moved in there, even changed the curtains for a decade, right? So we now have Kier Starmer's decade of national renewal. He's also hoping for a decade in power. But if the last two elections have taught us anything, it's that voters can be more volatile than they have been in the past.
And I think Kier Starmer's got to be very careful here. As I mentioned, he's got a block of MPs to his left in this Green platform. That's only going to grow. I mean, I think that's we've seen that in Europe. I mean, calling this for a while, and we've seen a clear delivery of it. That's going one way, and that's going upwards. Likewise with Reform, and possibly also with this new pro-Palestine sort of bloc emerging, which, as I said, yes, it's amorphous, but that could change. So, I mean, they've been very skillful in how many seats they've won at barely 34% of the electorate. It's not a secure platform for a two-term government, in my humble opinion. They've got to work on that. Now, a lot of this is tactical voting to the Lib Democrats and various other things. And as we're pointing out, if you put Reform plus the Tories, which, by the way, I think is the only way forward for the Tories if they wish to stay at all relevant, Conservative Reform, they are trademark that. Well, that's going to happen. It has to happen. The One Nation wets, if you want to call them, are dust. Please go and join the Lib Democratic Party or Labour, where you should rightly be. I would imagine would be the message out of the Tories. But, we've got a situation here where I think, Labour has to manage better in power than clearly Boris Johnson was ever able to. He was a great politician, far more charismatic, and a terrible administrator. From what I understand, what I see, and we see what Rishi and Jeremy Hunt had said, I think Kier Starmer and Rachel Reeves are going to be far more competent, and that should be the better for all of us.
Let me say a few things in favour of Kier Starmer here. Well, one is that his whole he won 35% of the votes, and that is a problem for him in the sense that he's saying, look, we spent all this time, the last 4.5 years, making the Labour Party fit for power. Corbyn can reasonably say, well, you actually scored 5 percentage points less than I did in 2017, so that complicates his message. But what he has done in making the Labour Party fit for power is not just win the 35% of votes, but establish his own control over the party. This is a Starmer-dominated party, a party in which everybody around him, with the possible exception of the deputy prime minister, is a Starmer loyalist, and in which the people who've been recruited, the new MPs, are dependent upon Starmer. And I think having that degree of power is really important. We've seen the Tory party losing essentially because it's not one party. It doesn't have any party discipline. It's been at war with itself. The Starmer people have been in opposition for 5 years, so they're hungry for power. They have a really determined sort of Thomas Cromwell style leader who knows how to wield power, and I think that will serve them. That will serve them very well. So the combination of a big majority, which means they don't have to face tough votes, and a centralized political machine dominated by Starmer and his acolytes is really important, and it will provide a period of stability. And the example of the mess the Tories created will also reinforce that message. So I think for at least for some time, you might have a few lunatics on the Palestine front, but they can be closed down. So we don't have to face the electorate for 5 years.
But he doesn't have it nailed in though for 10. That's all my point is this is not as convincing a win across all measures, breadth, depth, however you want to express it, that guarantees him 2-term parliament, which is what he needs for his alleged mission. He's going to have to manage properly, show he's managing and governing properly to get that second term. And that's nowhere near as secure as it might want to look even a week or two ago.
So, Marcus, how does he go about assembling a government from the sort of, major offices, but all the way down through? What will his priorities be? How do you see him balancing the interests of the party, and particularly the left of the party, with this need for delivering results for the longer term?
Well, the one thing I can honestly say with Kier Starmer is, as Adrian's alluded to, he has managed his own party extremely well. One would therefore imagine his roadmap, I hate that expression, but you know what I mean, for the government that he wishes to control 100% will be all laid out. I think he knows exactly what he wants to do. He's had Sue Gray, the civil servant, planning a lot. Morgan McSweeney. They have the best political machine, arguably in the world. We've just seen this show out how clever they've been. How
you mean even better than Biden's?
Well, that would be for that shadow of doubt. So, in that sense, I mean, one can only hope they can take their political skill sets into their governmental skill sets, and they can map out on. I don't think the shadow cabinet bench is very strong. I don't say that the one that they were replacing was very strong either, whittled down after 14 years. But they do have some notable weaknesses. They may play some cards as Rishi did by bringing in outside people like, for instance, David Cameron as foreign secretary. I don't see that happening yet. But I think the expression you came up with, Teresa, the other day, which was, he doesn't want to act like a mafia don and hand out to all the 5 families or whatever they may be their sort of desserts and rewards after the years or whatever. He has to be as ruthless in power as he's been getting into power, and that means choosing the best people, competent people, and taking people from outside of the Labour Party or nominally outside the Labour Party who've got real skill sets, and bringing in people from business, from technocrats, and indeed, other sort of perhaps some odd left field. Just not too many, but enough to give a balance. This is competency and practicality that's winning the day, not red politics and tooth and claw.
I think that's true, but remember when Tony Blair came into power, in 1997, people said, well, he's got a very inexperienced team. They haven't had any jobs. They don't know how to run governments. And that was a pretty successful government, at least before the Iraq war split confused anything. So I think much more important than experience is the will to power and they have the will to power, and a lack of division over ideology. And I don't think there is a big ideological division. The Corbyn people are there on the side. They can talk about the 40 versus 35%, but they have had their fingers removed very comprehensively from the levers of power.
Yeah. Although we did have union warnings right away this morning on public sector wages. We had, just a flick at the possibility of, dare anyone say winter of discontent, but further strike action. There's still the junior doctor strike that needs to be resolved, and it's not clear how that will be given, the very narrow room that Rachel Reeves will have in the budget. So there are some sort of, gathering clouds, maybe, as it were, or
absolutely. Yeah. It's not going to be difficult to run this country at all. It's in a very difficult set of circumstances. But I think a powerful prime minister with a big majority is in a better position to do that than a weak prime minister with a fractured party. So Britain is in a better place today than it was 2 days ago.
Can I ask you, just Kemi Badenoch, a potential Conservative Party candidate for leader, said after the vote, voters have lost trust in the Conservatives. Okay, I don't think anyone will disagree with that. And in politics, is there a sense that voters have lost faith in politics, or from, I think, if you looked at it from across the pond, even a low turnout of 60% would look at least a vote of confidence in the system.
Voters are angry. They're angry, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah.
They're angry that they've been sold a mess of pottage by the Conservatives. They're angry that things are broken. They do not love Kier Starmer. They hope that he will give them practical solutions. And if he doesn't give them practical solutions, the train's running on time and a bit more on time than they do, then they will turn against him very, very rapidly.
Yeah. We have a chart, I think, on what voter intentions were, what the key issues were going into the poll. I don't know if we can show that, because I think what it shows, we've done that. What that was, so there was a chart showing what voters care most about. And what was interesting about it was that immigration did not place as highly as you would have expected, given the way Nigel Farage ran his campaign, and also Rishi Sunak. Foremost was public services and the NHS. And this brings me to here we go. Yeah. So, what voters say they care about: cost of living, supporting the NHS. So cost of living, we've talked about it, what people feel, their disposable income, how much they have to pay versus how much they take home. But that NHS factor is enormous. And this brings me to Ed Davey, because we have enjoyed watching Ed Davey. In fact, no, let's enjoy watching Ed Davey one more time. Right? Show me Ed. Show us Ed Davey.
I haven't
claiming victory, and then we'll talk about. Do we have Ed Davey celebrating? Okay,
I sincerely hope Neil Diamond sues him.
Don't ever change, Ed, right? What I want to say is, behind that, I think the Lib Dems, yes, they had a very clever, they played it very clever tactically. They targeted certain, key seats that they could win from the Tories, but they also had one very simple message, which was reform of the NHS and social care. And I really do think, when you look at that chart of what voters care about, and Ed Davey and that Lib Dem message going, coming through, I think, that resonated, and they will put a lot of pressure on the Labour government, on NHS.
I disagree. I think they all ran just as went Tory.
They said reform the NHS. They never gave any very clear answer to the question of do what. Everybody talks about reforming the NHS, but the question is what, how, and in what way. And again, they didn't talk very much about community care. I think it's a vacuous campaign run by a rather clownish leader. And the one thing that a small party can do in the centre of British politics, is actors as a laboratory of ideas. And they're not acting as a laboratory of ideas, they're acting like a clown show. We've had that with the Tory party for the last 14 years. We don't need it in a new version.
I could not agree more. And the Liberal, the Orange Book movement, which their David came from, Nick Clegg and David Laws, these people must be going, what on earth is happening here? 71 of the luckiest seats ever, seven times the seat coalition for the exact same amount of votes. They got less than Reform. So as far as that, I think they got anything but Conservatives what won it and tactical voting, which will work when you kick out a hated incumbent government. Next time round, I think you'll see that Liberal Democrat vote collapse.
So Ed Davey has to back it up.
I think there are two very important things that are going on as well, that not in the centre of British politics, but on the periphery of British politics that really matter. One is the rise of Reform, 4 million votes, which is a lot. We don't do startups. We don't do startup political parties in this country very often. The last one was the Liberal Democrats, which was a sort of reconfiguration more than anything else. We have a startup here that's gone from nothing, that didn't look as though it was going to be running in this campaign, that's got, as I say, 4 million votes, and is also put at the centre of British politics. An extremely charismatic, skilled politician who has very close links with populist movements in Europe, very close links to Donald Trump, will attract a lot of attention, may well build upwards from here. That matters a huge amount to British politics. And the other thing is the way that Gaza has affected things. We very seldom have foreign policy making a big inroads, perhaps the Vietnam War, perhaps the Boer War at the beginning of the 20th century, but this had a huge influence, and it speaks to the problem that Kier Starmer has with the Muslim community in this country, and it speaks to the way that we're getting the beginning of a sort of politics based on ethnic identity and ethnic foreign alliances rather than on domestic issues. It's where the Muslim population was more than 20%, Labour's share of the vote went down a hell of a lot. They lost
Jonathan Ashworth lost the seat.
They lost a shadow cabinet member who had a big majority. I mean, this isn't small stuff. So there are a lot of very angry people, and Kier Starmer, who has shadowed the government's line on Israel, who has a wife who is Jewish, she's going to be under a lot of pressure, both personally and institutionally, to compromise over this, particularly as the by-elections come and the majority slowly, a huge majority, is whittled down.
Do not overlook the Greens. The Greens are here. That's a Europe-wide movement. They've never really shown up in the UK because the Liberal Democrats have always been associated as Green. If anyone's going to take the Liberal Democratic share next time, it will be the Greens, and also enrolled into Labour. They took actually 2 Labour scouts in Thangham Debonair in Bristol Central, as well as Jonathan Ashworth and Leicester. So, you could say that Liberal Democrats knocked 2 Tory cabinet ministers out, but the Greens knocked 2 potential Labour ones out. So these things are smallish in number of seats at the moment. I think the amount of votes they've got and their potential to grow are potentially, the mold of British politics has been cracked here. It's not broken yet, but clearly there is a lot to lose.
It's a boring election. It's a boring, old-fashioned election, under which there are a lot of very interesting things going on. The British system has done what it does extremely well, which is to produce a clear result through the first past the post system. But underneath the surface, there are a lot of fascinating currents.
Yeah, I wonder about what the Green influence would be, Marcus, because it feels like the public's quite conflicted on that. On the one hand, there is a really strong support for environmentalism and policies to combat climate change. On the other hand, when it comes down to making sacrifices, given a public that's already squeezed on cost of living and has dealt with a period of inflation, we really saw a backlash against that the Tories capitalized on, in by-elections, and Liberal Democrats did as well. So,
it's the youth vote.
It's
the youth vote, and very strong youth vote for reform as well. Surprisingly strong vote for reform. So, the youth are not voting for Labour and Tories as much as you would think they are. I mean, no one is. It seems up 56% of those 2 parties put together. But what the youth are looking at are change, proper change. And I think the Labour policy on bringing, all cars to be sold, essentially 8% of cars sold by 2030, not 2035. That's what their plan is, to bring it forward by 5 years from what the Tory party had done. Will be very interesting to see how they can stick that line. We've already seen things changing in Europe with regards to electric vehicles and import taxes. A lot of pushback from the German manufacturers. You'll see this with heat pumps. We're going to have a lot of pylons, to get all the solar and wind farms, to pump all the electric, that we need in the right places at the right time. So the whole NIMBYism thing is going to sprout up in front of Labour planning things. So there's a lot of things that can change. But the key thing is, Rachel Reeves has we'll know much more on July the 17th, by the way. That's the King's speech. We'll see what the various bills come out from Starmer and what his priorities are. And then we'll see again, probably not till October, from Rachel Reeves, what she's going to prioritize. She did want to spend 28 billion a year on green things. She cut that back to sort of
28 pence.
Well, exactly. So, we have to look forward to see what her fiscal wiggle. I think her fiscal wiggle is going to be much bigger than people think. I think the Bank of England can help out. I think she can change some things for the Bank of England, whether they like it or not. And I think it will be interesting to see where she spends that and whether that's going to be on net zero policies.
Adrian, do you think Britain is overly centralized? And do you think a Labour government will try to devolve more power to regions, and would that be to the good?
Well, there's a sense in which they're in a much better position to devolve power to the regions than the Tories were, because all of the regional mayors are Labour, as far as I can see. So they're devolving them to their cousins and brothers. One of the many striking things about what's happened in Britain is not just that the Labour Party has taken over central government with a vast majority, but they've continuously won. They took Birmingham away from the Tories. They've got they're ensconced everywhere, and they've advanced significantly in Scotland, so they can afford to devolve power. Whether they will want to do that, I likened Kier Starmer earlier to Thomas Cromwell, and I think he is a Cromwellian figure. And his instincts are to centralize power, as in some ways are the instincts of all people who have power. But he will run this ship very tightly from the center.
Yeah. And we've seen that in some of the manifesto pledges. We have Great British Energy. We have a skills body that's a public, a publicly run, centralized skills body. So while Labour talks about giving local authorities more control over funding, more powers.
Evolution is always attractive when you're in the opposition.
And the Tories,
it's like proportional representation.
The Tories amazingly wanted to give power away, and Michael Gove and both. I never understood it. I mean, it's an Americanism affectation. Take federalize everything, but it never works, and it never works for the Tories, in particular. But the biggest threat, probably practically, for governing for Kier Starmer will be his regional mayors. It'll be Andy Burnham. It'll be Sadiq Khan. There is going to be quite a lot of pressure coming from other areas which he cannot control. So he's going to be very careful in Scotland. But I would imagine that devolution powers are probably not going to be top of the agenda, despite Gordon Brown's best efforts. But he's going to want to be very careful in how he allows power away from the centre, because he won't get his agenda done.
Yeah. And obviously we saw so many of those seats that went Tory in 2019 revert back to Labour.
Sure.
They can go somewhere else, right? I mean, we have voters that are now getting used to shopping around.
Absolutely. I think many of the old loyalties have gone. Just in 2019, we saw the destruction of Labour's traditional loyalties in the north. We've seen exactly the same thing in the south, with a lot of the collapse of the blue wall, as it's called. The Conservative voters voting anything but Conservative.
Yeah, I mean, it also speaks to just the sort of urgency for Starmer, perhaps within his first term. I mean, he talks about a 10-year project over and over. He's sort of prepping voters for a two-term Labour, and his message is sort of like the turnaround that's required is so massive. It's not going to happen overnight. Bear with us. He's asking voters for a bit of patience, but that flipping of seats that we saw between 2019 and this year also suggests that if he doesn't produce something for those left behind areas, what Theresa May called the just about managing, he's going to be in trouble the next time we come around.
Democracies aren't very good at patience at the best of times, but when you've got a large chunk of voters who are very angry with the status quo, who feel they've been betrayed, whose living standards have been squeezed, that's a very volatile group. And again, reform. Nigel Farage said this morning that we are going after Labour. We've gone after the Tories. The next target is Labour, and I think there's that's quite interesting and quite significant, because those northern seats in particular, northern working class seats, are very vulnerable. They're not happy people, and they'll shift around.
The only thing I would say, Therese, is that actual fact, Rachel Reeves has got a much better setup. It's not as good as in '97, where Blair and Brown inherited an economy which just basically was in liftoff mode. But growth will be, over 1% before the end of this year. It's already running much stronger than thought. We're well past that sort of mini recession we had at the back end of last year. Inflation has dropped like a stone. It's quickly went up, back down. It's come from 11 down to 2. I suspect it's going to be struggling to stay anywhere near 2. It's going to, we've got negative goods inflation. Food inflation is dropping very sharply. Services is sticky, but that's always been very lagging. So I think there's going to be some interest rate cuts from the Bank of England as soon as August the 1st, possibly 1 or 2 more by the end of the year. I think there is going to be a little bit of an economic renaissance for that stability, which Adrian has eloquently pointed out. It's strong and stable. It's going to have much bigger, wider investment coming back in, perhaps a bit more rapprochement with Europe. There's a bunch of things. If Kier Starmer and Rachel Reeves can get a bit of the tax sort of fiscal drag out by 2029, he's already Jeremy Hunt has laid them up, taking away a lot of stuff from the working public. Minimum wage is much higher than it was before. People under £20,000 a year pay very little to almost no tax at all. And if you can get the sort of the middle bit, the £20,000 to £50,000 a year income earners, feeling a little bit better, I think that'll send them up as far as sort of the core vote, which he's very clear he wants to go after. He wants the people who are working, people who are paying tax. The wealth tax will come later on, and pensioners, but perhaps they've had as good a run as possible under the.
If Marcus is right about all of that, and he's sometimes right, then it makes it all the more extraordinary that Rishi called this election. Not only did he call it when the economy was improving, was strengthening, but he called it when Nigel Farage was fully engaged in Britain rather than fighting the election. And as we've said, if you take the reform votes and you add them to the Conservative votes, the Conservative Party would have won this thing. It didn't need to be quite the catastrophe that it was.
I'm going to interrupt you both while you're busy being right to show a clip of Kier Starmer in front of 10 Downing Street.
Good afternoon. I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation. This lack of trust can only be healed by actions, not words. I know that. But we can make a start today with the simple acknowledgement that public service is a privilege and that your government should treat every single person in this country with respect.
What do you think? How did Starmer come across in his first speech as Prime Minister?
I think the public service stuff is very, very good. I think it's exactly the right sort of thing. I think coming across as a safe, steady, problem-solving sort of figure, a very different sort of image from Tony Blair, is probably right for the sentiment of this country at the moment. So I think that's good. As the voice is not the perfect voice for a great orator, but I think that general modest style, rather like Attlee, actually is well positioned.
And he seems very self-aware when he says actions, not words. Don't. He's not the word guy.
If you can get a bit of progress on the NHS, get those waiting lists down, if you can get planning reform, you get a huge win, which I've never understood why the Tory party never went for this. They always got blocked themselves, and you can call it NIMBYism, call it whatever you want to, but the The national policy planning framework is just like a Japanese knotweed through our entire economy. For any form of project, be it commercial, residential, or anything, and it's need if you can cut through some of that, which ironically will need to give a lot more powers to the local councils, but then that will be their responsibility.
The reason Tories wouldn't do this is that their base vote consisted of NIMBYs. It consisted of hobbits living in their hobbit holes, wanting to make sure that the pylons and the new builds were kept away from their view. Labour has a different set of different constituency.
And those base votes contributed to the election of a succession of Tory leaders.
Yep.
How do the Tories choose this time, given their process? We can just I don't think we're going to be talking about.
They've got to change the process. I think the process is idiotic. Yeah, they have to. You know, the Tories face this massive existential question. You know, where do they go, left or right? But they also face a series of quite solvable questions. You know, constitutional questions, not giving too much power to an unrepresentative set of party members, giving decisive power to the MPs over who should lead them. So there are some bits of progress that they can make quite quickly. I personally would hope that Jeremy Hunt becomes the leader of the party. I think he's sensible. I think he's experienced. I think he'd be a good successor to Rishi and begin to move the party, you know, in the opposite direction from the one that Marcus thinks we should be moving.
He's my new MP.
You're lucky to have him.
Pleased to have him, and I think, as you said, he's a fine man. I don't think he wants to run for leader. But like Steve Baker earlier said, thank God it's all over and I'm never coming back. Jeremy Hunt wanted to stay. He wants to serve. I'll be interested to see if he might have some use for cross-bench stuff. I think that'd be quite interesting. You know, how Rachel Reeves gets supported and how they approached what she has to do to correct some things that they never had the ability to do or the will to do. But I do think that look, the Tory party has a choice here. It can either say, we're going to rebuff again for the 500th time Farage, and what will end up is we'll be shrunk to a cinder. Absolutely nothing will be left next time round. Or it decides to take over with a majority stake in a combined party. The longer it leaves it, that their theoretical majority stake will turn into a minority one. It will be a reverse takeover by Farage. So that means Kemi Badenoch, who doesn't seem to want to have Farage, I can totally understand why she doesn't, because he will come into the party and destroy from within. You give the option of Nigel Farage to be leader to the Tory members, he will be in like Boris, like a shot. So they've got to come up with someone. Penny Morden's not around. It's whether or not they go for someone like a Jenrick or a Priti Patel or indeed a Suella Braverman. Kemi Badenoch's probably the strongest of all of them, but she offers a route which is a dead end at the moment as far as their long-term future.
Yeah, as Adrian says, there are process issues, but then there are the questions of how do you become a big tent party again?
They need policies. They need to work out what a conservative is again.
Yeah, I suspect they need a long period of sort of penitence and silence.
The great question is whether it's 5 years or 10.
Yeah, exactly. So the one we talked about, all of the sort of problems that Britain is facing, from NHS backlog to house building to the debt and the deficit. But something you said in your column today, Adrian, is that you've got a fresh team in with fresh energy, and that in itself can really spark a sense of renewal. And Marcus, you've said it as well. Do investors feel more comfortable with this? So I think a lot will be determined by the initial signals the government sends.
I mean, it's impossible to underestimate how tiring being in government is. It's just a really, really full-time job. And the Tories have been doing this for 14 years. And Labour has, new people. And as I said, this combination of the will to power, when you've been in opposition, you have a will to power. You don't want to remain outside for any longer. And the energy of just not having this 24-hour thing. Now,
just look at poor old Rishi Sunak. He's aged in front of our eyes. I mean, the one advantage he's clearly not going to lose his hair now, and it's already gone silver white. So he's got that going for him.
I was just going to say, it's been pretty tiring watching it all. So.
I mean, one problem against that is that the 24-hour sort of politics and the relentless inspection. It's even more tiring than it ever has been before. Time is speeding up, and 5 years is like yesterday's 15 years. So it will be wearing, and it will be wearing on the Labour Party, but
you'll need those Friday evenings
have
off.
energy.
Yeah,
well, he should get them off.
I think Steve Baker made that point last night as the exit polls were coming out, that just in the era of WhatsApp and TikTok, and there's such an acceleration of the velocity of political movement that it becomes really it's tiring, but it's also hugely changeable. And I guess.
I was just going to say, the Labour Party's had 5 years in opposition to think of a set of policies to lay things out. None of these Tories who've come in have had that period in opposition. Rishi didn't have 5 years to think about what he wanted to do. Boris didn't, and Theresa May didn't. They all inherited a mess and inherited the 24-hour sort of news cycle. So those 5 years will pay off.
Yeah. So we need to wrap it up. I guess just one last thing. Is there anything we're expecting that hasn't been sort of hashed over in the campaign? The House of Lords reform, any of the other sort of things that bubble up from time to time that might change constitutionally or structurally? Or
I think they're going to be very careful. They saw what happened with this trust. The markets took their football away, and the last thing that Labour needs to do here is scare the gilt market. Scare the horses anywhere. I think they're going to be very slow, careful, hopefully competent, very boring, but maybe we want a bit of boring. And I wish them genuinely all the best in the sense of pushing through the vital planning reform and a raft of other stuff to sort out, as we know, the parlor state of our public services.
It'll be growth, and growth rather than constitutional fiddling. That's minor. That'll be.
I hope so. Gordon Brown's gonna have to wait for another few years, I hope.
Well, I'll raise my glass of water to growth, and growth. Thank you both again very much. This has been great, and I'll see you soon. And maybe we'll talk before the next election.
Indeed.